Hello, my name is Daniel Hill of Alchemical Records, and I am very excited to be joined here tonight with Garrett Gleason and Ryan Buell, exploring their improvisational collaborative album, Maybe We Leave. Garrett and Ryan got together at the historic club, the Black Cat, in October of 2021 with acclaimed engineer Sean Gotkin and recorded 3 hours of guitar improvisations. Gleason and Buell then took the recordings to their own private studios and independently concocted songs from the improvisations without limitations and with total creative control. The 15-song album titled Maybe We Leave is the resulting collection. Welcome, Ryan and Garrett.
Thanks for having us, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for having us on here.
Let's see. How do I want to focus on both of you, not on this face. So we'll start here. So I'm very excited to dive into everything that is Maybe We Leave. But before we do that, Garrett, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then Ryan will give you a chance to kind of dig a little deeper too.
Sure.
Great. Thanks, Dan. I'm Garrett. I've been, before the pandemic, for about 10 years, I was based out of the DMV area, recently relocated to New England, but most of my collaborations, which I'm very lucky to have taken part in many, are with musicians either based out of the DMV or who I met through my lot of work down there. And I try to make as much music as I can and whole ass all of it. And I'm really lucky to do what I do. So I try to make what I like, and that's sort of me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. How about you, Ryan?
Well, I'm Ryan Buell, and I'm out here. Right? What's the question again? Sorry, I was busy setting up my chat. Oh, but I see the chat over there. Excellent. Well, I'm Ryan Buell. I am, again, super lucky to be a part of one of Garrett's collaborations. If I do give him that much of the credit on this album, I would. Super happy to be here about that. I've been kind of in the same orbit with Garrett for a long time. I want to say 2011 at Pyramid Fest was when we met, or maybe
Sounds right.
Maybe earlier than that. But
I graduated college in 2013, and that's when my group took off. So maybe it was that year, but
that would make sense. Mm-hmm.
But still, 8 years, or 9.
Mm-hmm. It's 9. Right. Time flying by. But we've been in each other's orbits, and we originally were in a band together called Let's Fight, which had like 2 gigs, like a powerhouse DC wall of sound jam kind of thing that was really weird and great. Really had a lot of fun in that short-lived project, but we're always kind of either playing each other's shows, opening for each other, or going to each other's shows. We've been doing this kind of stuff for ages, and I'd say it's about time we finally had an album together. So I'm very excited to put this one out and give it to all the refreshed ears out there.
So I had mentioned, that this was a part improvisational, part collaboration, and then some independent production on your own. Do you mind kind of digging in a little bit about what that process looked like generally?
Sure. Yeah. So generally, we met up and had the space there for the Black Cat to kind of get our basic points. And to start out, we both kind of emailed back and forth as to what the project was actually going to be, because really, as far as we had planned it at that point, would be to just do something. So it ended up being that Sean Gotkin offered us a little bit of time over at the Black Cat when there was nothing happening kind of during the daytime for us to come out and record with him. So we kind of got things started with, correct me if I'm wrong, but a list running by, right? Kind of outlining a couple of beats per minute we might do songs at, and a couple of adjectives to kind of riff off of and find these moments for. And kind of moving from there, we had one dress rehearsal at my place when Garrett came back into town from up in New England, where we kind of just tried some stuff out and saw what would stick and made sure that our rigs were going to work. We did two different kinds of rigs. I don't mean to steal the show. Feel free to cut in anytime, but we've got two kinds of rigs that we used on the original recordings for this. We did two electric guitars with a DI with pedals in the front, and then we had two acoustic guitars that we did some house mics for when we ran past it there. But generally, we had, what was it, a 3-hour slot during the middle of the day, the morning there, and we essentially just pressed play and threw stuff at the wall for the entire time, and then every once in a while we get a little bit of a cut and a little bit of a tune up and change things out and fix stuff and going for it again for, I want to say, like 20-30 minute sessions at a time, just kind of letting loose, letting something happen as we go. um, but beyond that, right, we finish recording, we get the tracks back, and we spent the better half of a year kind of piecing through things and cutting stuff up and warping things and arranging stuff and writing MIDI drum parts and writing keyboard parts and putting bass parts places and synthesizers and absolutely everything else you hear in here. I want to say, in terms of a percentage level, the original guitars tend to inhabit maybe 70% of this album. In terms of the original, like, actual audio that has been stretched and pitch warped and thrown in with 1,000 effects on top of it as we go. It might not seem like it. If you actually heard the originals, they sound pretty starkly different from what the actual album became in the end. So I would say that there is a good amount of um, the last half of that, the independent production of each track, really inhabited a lot of the creative process behind it, beyond the simple, let's play some stuff and like stare into each other's eyes and go like this, right? Which is fun and great in and of its own. But I think a lot more of the interesting artistic elements of this one really come through in the production and the post fact there.
So it definitely sounds like for me that there's a lot of ambience there, like atmosphere that has been added. It would be, of course, hard for me to determine without hearing the original recordings, like how much of what is what. But I can certainly, feel like there's like each song has an intention around various like emotions and feels, and I imagine that has something to do with like the naming scheme and things like that as well. Um, how do you feel, about capturing like individual components, instrumentally throughout the album?
Individual components. Yeah.
I'll be honest and say that I'm going to answer this question in a way that sort of puts input of my own to the last one, because I think this is going to answer what you're asking. But I mean, I hit up Ryan at the beginning, like before we started planning a session and all of that, saying like, let's make a noise record. I think I said that. He's like, let's just like make a noise record, just us two, or like guitar noise, like really go in at it. And then when we made this list that Ryan was talking about, it was a number of BPMs and stuff, but also a number of prompts, I'll call them, that like, limitation breeds creativity in ways that you wouldn't think otherwise. And it only gave us more varied things to choose from, whether that was like, this is only chords and maybe we start in a key and then let ourselves stray, or this is, he's playing high, I'm playing low, and that's the only thing we're talking about, or that's the only thing said. But things like that. And then the session went how it went. And at the end of the day, I can only speak from my own standpoint in terms of how arranging this went. But I love I mean, I love working with improvised tracks. I like to think of them as like fodder to write tunes with. And at the end of the day, it always boils down to one of two things. It's I'm listening to the music in front of me. What does it inspire me to make, or what ideas am I making from it? And then I just obsessively chase it and treat the material and add in order to make that happen. Or the other thing is, oh, this material in front of me gives me an idea that might not be related to this material, but this can be sort of a texture to help support this music I could make with this being support for it, you know? So on my end, I wasn't really thinking thematically or trying to make any sort of tonal arc in my own body of work that I was contributing, just because I know we weren't going to make an album that's like the front half is me and the second half is him. So any sort of arc of an album or themes paced in a certain way wouldn't make sense to it wouldn't have made sense to compose or produce that way. But it was just sort of every song idea or everything I was working on was an island unto itself. And then because we didn't communicate as to who was using what part of the improv or anything like that, we had repeating guitar fodder used in his songs and in my songs. So themes showed up. And I guess the order of songs that we chose at the end of the day to make the album was like a clever cocktail of let's alternate a bit to have our voices said. Also, this feels like, you know, trying to craft an album based upon pacing of energy or of maybe key centers, I guess. And then also the themes sort of fell where they fell, you know?
Yeah, that sounds like a great description of the album from, you know, a listener's perspective as well. So I really appreciate that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Let's dive in. I mean, I think that you've set up the tone really well, both of you, just for us to have a listen, you know, to one of the songs and get a feel for how these different elements are brought together. The first track that I've got queued up is, if I've got to look at my notes, I've already lost my short-term memory here, is Knick Knack. So can you tell us anything about Knick Knack or anything that we should know about Knick Knack before we listen to it?
All right. So Knick Knack is one of mine. This album especially, I am trying real hard to not be possessive of my parts versus Garrett's parts because I think they really do in the end work as a whole together, right? But Knick Knack is one of the ones that I produced, and so I think me and Garrett take a very different perspective on naming convention. Um, whereas I don't know if this is every one of Garrett's tracks on this, but it always seems like there's a story and an element behind it, or some kind of ethos behind actually naming the track that is good for press and good for conversation. My naming conventions always tend to live on a more esoteric side of things. I'm a BWV number kind of person when it comes to my Bach. I like to just kind of throw a number at a thing and make it happen. A lot of my stuff starts with very simple placeholder names for the tracks. For instance, all of my placeholders when I first started this project were Greek letters, so alpha, beta, delta, as I went through them. So once I got to naming Knick Knack is actually named for when I was a very young child, my grandmother had this tiny little shelf with little, not toys, but little figurines. There's a little carved elephant is one of the themes in the song Knick Knack. There was a polished stone squirrel in there. A lot of stuff that in retrospect, my grandmother probably shouldn't have let me play with and touch and in the end break and destroy as much as I did. But this one is sort of a conglomeration of the emotions I feel thinking about being young again and having this level of joy with something small that I can hold in my hand that's interesting as I go by them. So This one and a lot of the ones that I have produced tend to live as a collection of vague memories in this kind of way too. So you'll kind of hear Knick-Knack drop through several series of settings the same way that another one of my tracks, Entomology, kind of flows through several different bugs are the different movements in that one. But this one tends to be small figurines that I had once upon a time, and I don't know where they are anymore. And I was thinking about them. So that's my story on Knick-Knack, right? Do we have it ready to plug away?
Yeah, I'm excited to listen. I have a similar knick-knack experience as a child, so it'll be
Oh,
fun to
excellent.
kind of, experience it with those memories in mind.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
God, I love that ending, man. that synth choice is such a vibe every time. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're just joining us, we were listening to a track from Maybe We Leave, the new collaborative album by guitarists Garrett Gleason and Ryan Buell. You can find Alchemical Records coverage of Maybe We Leave, which I'll share that link for you now. But first, let me let you point to the Bandcamp. Certainly hope that if you are inspired enough to go and check out the album on Bandcamp and make a purchase and join the mailing list there, that you'll let Ryan and Garrett know. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Ryan. I was just excited to give you the plug.
Oh, I was excited to get the plug as well. So you can kind of hear through that it kind of evolves and moves through these different stages. The last section there is actually not something that my grandmother gave me, but it's something that ended up on those shelves after she passed, which was I used to have a Monopoly set that was Star Wars based that came out when the 1999 remasters of the original 3 Star Wars movies came out. But this Monopoly set had pewter figurines of all of the main cast. So the last portion of that is a tiny little Han Solo made of pewter that I kept on that same shelf. And the part right before that was a elephant where the flutes sort of come in and it starts to drive a little more. And squirrel was the first one, and then a little I'm trying to think of the name of it, but there's these clay figurines from the Southwest, from an indigenous culture that I don't want to get their name wrong. But it's a woman sitting and she's got several children on her lap about it. I cannot remember the name of it for the life of me, but we had one. Something storytellers, but there's one of those that's in there. But the most important ones there to me are the elephant. That was one of my favorites. And of course I couldn't avoid throwing a ton of synthesizers into the back end of something and take it to that next blast it into space, as it were. That's always my answer for the end of a song.
Dan, before you go on, a lot of this record, we shared like where like the music and what we thought about each other's tunes and stuff like that, but not really much in terms of the process or like our reasons behind anything. So everything you just said, that was my first time hearing any of that. And like, I already loved this tune in particular because he can very compellingly make almost like a series of vignettes that have to do with one another and then put a really nice cohesive bow on it at the end. But to hear like the reasoning and it tied into his life, like I love that shit. That's cool. I did not know that about it, and that makes the song cooler to me now. But I chose it for this on your behalf because I liked it, because it was a good song. But I love hearing.
Yeah, that's why I didn't want to specifically pick out anything when you're like, we're going to look at a couple of songs here. I didn't want to really specifically look at any one thing. Because a lot of this stuff, right, I have a lot of meaning behind that now. But when I first started writing that, it was just an Ableton session and figuring out, just throwing a thing on top of a thing and, oh, this kind of sounds like this. That later gets kind of supplanted on top of what I'm actually doing. So even though it sounds very well constructed and thought out, right, I'm not some wild savant artist when it comes to that kind of thing. A lot of that gets kind of placed on it at sort of towards the mixing stage where I'm listening to it 1,000 times and sort of have time to kind of let my mind wander while I'm fixing my levels and getting everything just so.
But I feel that's a safe space. I mean, that's like a process that I think most artists go through. You know, you have to write something because it needs to exist, but then and then you start to kind of assign some relationship to it, you know, and only by the end of it does it become all of the things. Right. So yeah, we won't put you on too much of a pedestal, but it's a damn good story, you know.
Let me boost up my chair 10 feet.
I'll only mention, that for me, the knickknacks that I always come to mind was, for whatever reason, a lot of folks that my parents took us to when we were younger were these interlocking puzzles, and they were like cubes or stars or, some sort of weird lock key combination looking thing. And I was always able to take them apart, but never able to put them back together as a like 5 or 6 year old before my family left. So I always remember abandoning all of these pieces in people's living rooms.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I used to love those kinds of puzzles. Live by them.
Well, so now this song, because you've shared that, like I'm able to kind of like share a little bit in some of those memories with you. So thank you. Let's listen, Garrett. We've got a track for you that you can maybe set up for us. It is let's see. It is called A Maze of Flailing Arms. So you have a different kind of naming scheme than Ryan does.
Yeah. So this is the first song I made for this session. With every collaboration that I do, improvise with the person, throw a bunch against the wall, but then step away for a month and let my head clear of any of the heebie-jeebies of like, oh, I really loved this session because I always, oh, I really love this section, or ooh, I can't wait to work with X, because once I go from a moment where I'm in a really exciting room working with someone, then I go into the DAW and I hear untreated audio. I just have a whole like gust of wind just like taken out from beneath me, like, and it's such a bummer at the very beginning. So I try to give myself space, and then I go into it. And this was the first one I went into it with, and it was sort of just to start the spirit of this whole record, where we are taking these improvised guitar things, but chopping them up in ways that sort of divorce it from the room or the moments we had together, but the sounds that we made are just fodder to make pieces of. I've got a bass and some strings and some drums in here, but there's also a lot of just ethereal swirling, like 4 or 5 acoustic or guitar loop layers that happen from across different times of the session. There's stuff from like the first 15 minutes and stuff from 2 hours deep that are like kind of on top of each other and arranged to make work. And as far as the name of it, I've always been, Ryan alluded to it earlier, my naming style kind of tries to paint a picture, and I don't ever think I have a notes app on my phone that is just called Title Ideas. And if it's anything, and I just love imagery that makes me go like, huh. And that could be anything from like, I see something, I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I write that down, and all of a sudden 5 different wordings or swapped out things just to see if I want to use it ever later. This song title came from me trying to describe the feeling of, 'cause I just started teaching at a boarding school. I just started teaching at a boarding school sometime when I started working on this tune, and it coincided with me trying to describe this feeling of looking into a new situation and seeing like, this is a totally navigable thing. It is in my wheelhouse. I can do this, but oh boy, am I intimidated, and I don't know exactly how to start this. I'll figure it out. It's going to, that first sort of anxious feeling that is kind of extra to have. And I don't know, that I always love trying to, with an image, try to paint something that goes into our minds that we can just label as one emotion or like a specific feeling like I just described, And whenever I use those song titles onto music, it's either something that 100% meshes with the vibe or the timbre, just how the song feels, with like, if it's an aggressive title and it's an aggressive song, that sort of pairing. Or my favorite is when it's just polar opposite, because then it makes you think of that sort of subject matter in like oh, you know what? This actually might be the kind of calm that might happen in your head right when you see a maze of flailing arms, So this was just one of those song titles that I was working on, but this piece in the time of my life and with the vibe that this title gave sort of aptly fit. And that's all I'll say. This is A Maze of Flailing Arms.
Well, if you're just joining us, then you are listening to music that is from Garrett Gleason and Ryan Buell's brand new album, Maybe We Leave. You can find Alchemical Records coverage of the album on alchemicalrecords.com, or you can check it out in its entirety on Bandcamp. I will share the links to both of those for you shortly. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you've got any questions, please go ahead and feel free to toss them in the chat, and I will make sure that we see if we can get both Garrett and Ryan to cry before the end of the interview.
Oh,
Mess me up.
just go ahead and play all of Garrett's tracks. That's how you do it.
So I will ask Garrett, I mean, so having heard it, and again, just like description wise, maybe it is easier after the fact when you've had some time to like stew on a track and like kind of figure out how you feel about it, and how it reflects and speaks to you. But I could certainly hear that tension that you were describing, even just like the siren, or even like thinking things in my head where it's like, maybe there's like a noise. At first it's just a noise, but then it's lasting too long to be something that you can ignore, right? So then it really becomes so dominant or so prominent in the focal point. So to me, that was helping to create a lot of that tension that you were talking about earlier on.
Yeah, man, appreciate that. It's what you're saying about like not stewing on, or having time to stew on it, and then sort of dots lining. I think there's that Steve Jobs quotes like "follow your heart and connect the dots later" or something like that. I think he said that in a commencement speech somewhere. But I've always loved that, like particularly in my musical endeavors, or just the projects I want to just completely enrapture myself in. I just know that I want to make, and I know that I will only be happy if I don't half-ass anything, but whole-ass it, but doesn't have to mean much in the moment, but just do it and go all in. And then the context might be screamingly obvious later on from what you're going through, and much of this project, I mean, particularly that song, because it was the first that I worked on, and the title I told you, it's a case in point of that,
Yeah, and I know that this is maybe not necessarily tied directly into the song, but I'm curious if the collaborative nature of things itself is like part of your own expression, like, because so if somebody goes to your Bandcamp, I think they'll see that collaboration is kind of a big part of your expression. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of collaboration in terms of how you express yourself creatively?
Would love to, man. So I actually wrote this in what I gave to you guys in like a press advisory, but Ryan and I both love this thing that I've always been huge on, which is I love working. I love improvising with other people, particularly players I love, and just like going in and seeing what happens. And particularly because however you're feeling at the very beginning of it, from minute 10 till 50, just nothing else exists, and you're just pressure cooking something special, And but then afterwards, to just like say, "See ya, everyone," and then just like shut myself up in my little lab and just be maniacal with the things, however, until it becomes the thing I want it to be, whether much of it is kind of like preconceived at the beginning, or if it's just through shaving and sculpting until I make it into what I want. So I love making music with people, and that's sort of been a guiding principle for it. I came up with this sort of collaborative recording process for particularly me with another drummer. You're going to see on Bandcamp and on Spotify, wherever you get your music, most of the albums I have out are me and someone else, and that someone else is usually a drummer. This is the second album of mine, Maybe We Leave, where it's with another guitarist. But mostly it's with other drummers. And I started doing that because I had the really fortunate opportunity to tour around the world, around North America with a musical right before the pandemic. And it was for an 11 and a half month contract, but it was cut 8 months short due to the pandemic. And during that time, I quickly realized, as many musicians have, like, your identity can be really linked to like what music you're working on or how musically active you are. You can get into this soul crushing kind of point in the road if you're not working hard enough on your own thing. I don't know. I know a lot of people do think about it that way. I am one of those people. But on the music, like a month deep into being in this musical, I realized, wow, if if I'm only doing this musical and don't have a way to 100% be able to work on my own stuff without any limitations because I'm on the road, then I will be very upset very soon and have like existential like musician thoughts, like, what am I as a musician? Am I just this guitarist? So that on that tour, we had layoff periods, like a week or 2 weeks off, where I'd go back to DC, and I booked at Bass Clef Studios in Bowie. I booked sessions, and I got together with drummers that I love playing with. One was Olaolu Ajibade, who's in my trio down there. Another's Aaron Fisher, who I've done a lot of duo stuff with. Another's Ethan Snyder, who I've been following for a long time and finally got to do something with. But sessions where I'd get together with a drummer, completely DI my guitar and looper setup, and then just record drums in the room. And then we just improvise for an hour. And then at the end of those sessions, I'd have that drummer record themselves hitting each drum and each cymbal, and then kick cymbal and then snare cymbal, all those combinations, so that I could use those to stitch if I wanted to. And then what I had as a result was all of these drums without any guitar in them, then all of this guitar without any drums in them that I could arrange into whatever I wanted. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and I was left in my room and I couldn't get together with anyone. So I was in this perfect situation where not only did I had 3 albums worth of stuff that I could make in front of me, with drums that excited me, guitar that I was heartfelt in the moment and stuff, and no one telling me I couldn't add to it or anything like that. But also, it's original music of mine and of that person's if I wanted it to be, So I started developing a process of making albums that way, and then ever since, it's been sort of a mostly with drummers. But even if I do it with another guitarist, I still just I get all the tracks in the DAW. Things are separated enough for me to have control over any track, and then I get to just say, does this block of music that I've decided is going to be the Ableton or just the DAW? I was using Reaper a lot then too, but is this going to be the window that I'm going to make a song, or is this going to serve for other stuff? And I just start sculpting, making whatever it's going to be until I feel it's done. So it's kind of due to the pandemic that I have developed this, due to the national musical tour and then the pandemic, that I was put in a position where I just want to improvise with drummers, because I was doing those kinds of shows anyway before the pandemic, but actually make records proper. And then the pandemic just okay, well, I'll stay in my room and get more confident at it. And now I am thankfully many records deep, because I am on good graces with enough drummers that I love to play with, that want to do it with me. And also their part of the deal is pretty minimal. It's they show up, they play, we have a good time, and then I hit them up with a record 6 months later. Luckily I just got to tour one of them, because now people are kind of responsibly enough getting back on the road, so there was an added thing, and that was fun. But it's sort of the same spirit as this. We get together, improvise, and then we're both and we maniacally make in our rooms until the thing's done on our own terms.
That's a fun process, or it sounds like a fun process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is very fun. It's very liberating, because with But with that process, I'll just go to the drummer one. The so much of my songwriting process until I came up with this recording process has been like, I have an idea. Let me massage this idea. How am I going to orchestrate this idea? And oftentimes, many musicians can probably speak from experience of like that idea is like full, like many times those ideas are fully formed in our head. Like, oh shit, there's a beat and a melody, and the melody has a certain texture, and you figure it out. Or you're fumbling on your instrument, you figure it out, and then you write ideas, and then it becomes a thing. But in this situation, it was a very liberating, like, here's the music, make it into what you want, and it's yours. And then from there, it was just like further and further getting better at using the tools and getting more confident and chasing particular idea with any of the fodder I was using to make an idea work. That's all I got to say about it. It's a fun process. I encourage anyone to do it. It's incredibly liberating.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Noted.
So I want to cover one last question of my own. If you have questions, you're welcome to drop them in the chat. I wanted to ask, because we had seen some of the visuals. And we talked a little bit about it, Ryan, in the green room. Do you mind kind of giving the inside scoop into how those visuals are there, and what you plan on doing with them in a much better way than I did for this little preview?
Sure. So all of that visual stuff there, I created using AI. And generally what that is I used wombo.art, not to give them a huge plug or anything, because I don't consider them to be a super big part of my creative process when it came to the visual arts of this, but they were a part of it. So generally what I did was, this is an AI that requires a prompt, big shocker, and that could also incorporate using a JPEG as well to kind of base its image off of too. So I may have, over the course of, let's call it 3 months, generated maybe something close to a couple 100,000 frames of that kind of thing. When you see that GIF, those GIFs are mostly about 50 to 75 frames each. Now, when I'm actually generating those frames, there's a lot of, oh, that didn't generate the way I wanted to, and I'm not going to use that, and kind of picking and choosing and finding what it's really going to do for you. So it was a lot of trial and error and finding something that was going to work, and then finally taking each one of those single JPEGs and stitching them together into one of these sort of longer portions there. It's a lot of just trying to find the right mood that fit the actual track when we run past that kind of thing. But I'm pretty happy with a lot of the result. Some of it is kind of here, kind of there, but it's an experiment, and that's kind of the theme we've got running through here, is that everything should kind of break the barrier that you're used to as you're running by it. All right.
We've got a question from Jason in the chat. Was there a drummer present during the recording session? If not, how did you go about processing them, incorporating that element into the mix?
All right. So there was not a drummer present. It was me and Garrett and Sean Gotkin behind the board there. All of the drums are post here. So we're talking MIDI drums or sampled audio files, mostly MIDI drums. I don't know if Garrett used any full sampled portions, but a couple of my MIDI drums are built out of sampled kits. So kind of running from that, using a lot of my go-tos, and just finding things. Finding the right kit is really difficult, especially when it comes to these virtual kits like that. So it's a good bit of, again, trial and error, and sitting behind the computer for hours and hours listening to 400 different kick drum samples, trying to find exactly the kick I'm looking for, kind of thing. But yeah, just a lot of programming, and then shifting things off grid just slightly so that they feel a little more natural. At least that's my portion. How about you, Garrett? What is your drum? How do you write your drums?
Probably in the same sort of trial and error thing that you do, but also with a strong, when uh, you have the music in front of you, this improvised segment or this sampled block of sound, and then all of a sudden an idea comes to you. And you and I probably have enough experience to confidently, if we hear, oh, this idea in my head is supported with a ka, to be able to parse out what those are and to quickly enough get either MIDI keyboard out, flush out the part, or move blocks around, and then the actual timbral differences between this song needs a kick that's closer to an 808 than the others. That kind of stuff, at least for me, happens after. I try not to tone chase in the recording process. I try to be just as sound vomit as possible, and then fine tune from there. And oftentimes that involves shaving away after. But yeah, as far as drums, it's pretty intuitive from the idea that's in my head, from the idea that the music in front of me gives me, and then I sort of MIDI it out, and then the actual tones of those drums come later from me mixing and matching. I also like adding pedals or stock plugins after MIDI. Like I do a lot of overdrive or like reverb followed by overdrive after a MIDI drum kit, and try to get brittle sounds, or try to, kind of thinking like a guitarist with pedals, but with MIDI. I don't think I'm special in that regard, but that's part of the trial and error. But something before I go to a different kick drum patch because I don't like the sound of it, I'm always on the mind of like, well, how can I affect this to make it into what I want? And I end up being pleasantly surprised with something different afterwards.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel like in the process of writing all of these MIDI drums, I constantly go through taking my MIDI kit and dropping a new kick sample. Kick is the one that I do the most, snare being the second most changed out sound that I use, because as I'm running through it, my ear just gets really fatigued at it, or realizes it just doesn't fit the right way. And I'll kind of either get rid of that sound entirely or layer another kick part directly under it. I think almost all of my tracks have maybe 3 to 6 kick drum samples running all at once, kind of thing, where I'll take the MIDI that's just on the kick drum and drop it into another channel and just have the kick drum part, and then do it again and again until I get a nice beefy sound I'm looking for. But I am super interested in Zach's next question over here, but I'll let you ask it.
Yeah. So Zach asks, who is the better guitarist? And I'd like to take this one further. Would both of you be willing to submit yourselves to a cutting heads contest a la Ralph Macchio Crossroads with Steve Vai?
Oh God.
Sorry,
go ahead. Yeah.
You start.
I just wanted to start by saying that is a very formative portion of a movie that I've never seen, but I've seen that part of that movie 1,000 times, because that's how I figured out who Steve Vai is. And I used to live and die by Steve Vai. There's a lot of people out there that have kind of blown his style of virtuosity out of the water. But I used to just love it, and that just sticks in my brain, and I can see it. But I will just jump in ahead and say that Garrett is definitely the better guitar player. I've seen him do it, and it makes me jealous every time I watch him play. So Garrett, tell me who's the better guitar player, you or Zach?
Zach owns a Chapman stick.
He does.
I think he'd really like everyone to know it.
If only he used it.
I'm not going to satisfy. I love what you said. That is really flattering. Thank you. I worked with you on this because I respect your playing in a similar way that you respect mine. And I'm not going to satisfy him with an answer from my end.
That's even smarter.
Because he's snobby enough to have a Chapman stick.
He knew he was trying to bait us with that question.
I think both those answers are beautiful, though.
Mhm.
And I will comment, like I've had respect for Steve Vai for many, many years because for as long as I can remember, which is a really long time, um, there have been Steve Vai's 40-hour work week has been like reprinted over and over again in various guitar magazines, like annually. And
Mhm.
so I think that it helps to highlight real quick, like, would you like to play like Steve Vai? Here's 40 hours a week of exercises, and you too can play like Steve Vai.
Oh yeah, definitely. He's also got a section of his website called the Tiny Little Dots, which is all just polyrhythmic exercises and weird tappy stuff and just like the most pedagogy nerd pedagogical exercise kind of stuff you could possibly have that I regularly show. I also teach, so I do that. I give that stuff out to all of my besties. Um,
Some
but
follow-up questions here are who's the better bassist, and then who played bass on the record? Was there any bass
hmm.
guitar on the record?
I'll answer that. Ryan's the better bassist here. Uh, and that's because Ryan's got naturally a better right hand than I do, and he's worked bass for much longer and more gig centric stuff than I have. There's no real bass on any of my songs, though. I am MIDI and synth bass till the grave. I always have been that way, or octave guitar and then double it, like audio to MIDI converter and double it with synth bass.
Mhm.
I've loved working that way. I love bassists. I don't want to buy another bass ever.
Are you sure? Because like
I'm not.
for another thing, right?
Yeah, I sold my Barry guitar and regretted it for
You
another
sold your
guitar.
no.
Yeah,
I
I sold it
wanted
for another
that.
guitar. It had to happen.
Dang.
But yeah,
I got a
I don't
guitar.
play much bass. I can play bass for the ideas that I need to, and I can sit and hang and play charts and improvise and all that fun stuff. But my there's a Pat Martino saying that I co-opt for myself, which is my left hand is the graduate and my right hand is the dropout, and that is
Mhm.
100% me.
I think that's most guitar players out there. Speaking as a guitar teacher, that
Yep.
most people kind of get enough to survive with their right hand and then spend all of their time staring at their left hand, right? If you're playing right-handed guitar playing, when you're dealing with that. But that's interesting. Actually, that's a question I feel like I've had since we started putting this record together. Whether you were actually using a bass for some of your tracks, because it can be kind of hard to tell because we tend to kind of layer and layer and layer. I will
Mhm.
say for Knick-Knack, actually, Knick-Knack is. I didn't put bass on every one of mine. There is a lot of bass throughout. I've got my nice bass mods that I got from Corey Belcher if he's out there, that I use to do all of that tracking. But on Knick-Knack specifically, I actually took this guitar right here and down tuned it almost a full octave, a fifth, right? So down to B for a specific point. I want to say about 2/3 of the way through, so that it's all the way to the floor, so you get that sort of floppy corn sound out of the acoustic guitar. Specifically, and then doubled that an octave lower with, of course, synth bass. But I'd say there's a lot more synth bass on this record than there is other bass parts. And I have to thank Garrett for giving me that compliment and compliment him on his complimentariness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Excellent.
I love digging in. I appreciate all the questions. I appreciate everybody for joining the chat, and especially Garrett and Ryan, both of you, for just taking so much time to kind of dive into this project with us here. We really enjoyed being able to share the article about the brand new album on the website, and hopefully we'll be able to promote this video a little bit more and shine a little extra light on all the hard work and creativity that went into making it.
Appreciate you, Dan. This is a lot of fun.
Awesome. Let's do it again real soon. As soon as either of you have some new music to share, I'll be here.
Absolutely. Hopefully, within a year, I'll have something going on. I just wanted to say thanks to Sean Gotkin for recording us and letting us use his
Oh yeah.
space for this. It was fantastic. And thank you as well for having us on and doing that fantastic write up as well. If anybody cares, I'll be at the 8x10 on October 14th and 15th with my band Jack Funk. I always have something to plug. So that's my other band that does like standard 4-piece band. That's where Jason comes from, actually. That's another baited question about bass players because I used to be the bass player in that band. But anyway, October 14th and 15th at 8x10 if you're in the Baltimore area.
It's a great space. Be there.
I like it.
Nice.
Thank you so much for tuning in tonight, everybody. For more about Alchemical Records, you can go to alchemicalrecords.com. We're also launching our in-print zine this October. So any support from subscribing or through supporting in our super supporter program with all of our behind the scenes content that's going in to develop the printed zine, you'll be supporting our efforts to do Q&As like this, to be able to actually get our printed zine delivered right to your door, and to continue to do the editorial content that we've provided since 2018, 2017, somewhere in that ballpark. So definitely appreciate any support. We appreciate the viewership. Share this video on your favorite platform with all the people you love, so that way Ryan and Garrett get all that extra loving for the new record. Thank you all so much. Anything you want to add before we close out?
You're doing a really cool thing, Dan. Appreciate you giving us the time to do this. Check out the record, everyone, and go to the 8x10.
Do it. Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Ryan.